For this audience, I had the benefit of going to a conference a few weeks ago, and there were representatives of the provincial, municipal, federal governments there. And they all admitted there were huge issues, right? That, much more study to be done, much more changes to what's going on. Everybody complained about the regulation. But I asked all of them, I said, okay, in 5 years, what does success look like? How do you know if you've done a good job, right? And this market evolving the way it is, I mean, the gentleman on the right, points to these huge dumpster fires right now in various regions. For you guys, though, what would you look back on? In 5 years, how do you define success or failure? And how do in that context, looking forward?
Sure. I'll go first. We go on the table, I guess. From my perspective, success, there's a lot of, you're going to get a lot of really good answers. I suspect that these people, with what the work that they're doing, are going to give you some definitions of success that we all need to hit. But from my perspective, the origin of success for all of them is going to be, especially in British Columbia, but across the country, processors that are set up to input micro-cannabis from a wide variety of micro-growers in their region that are sending it in, getting it batched up, and then shipped out in a constantly kind of humming little machine, particularly in rural British Columbia. And the reason I say that is because it's where the project is grown now, it's where the jobs are now, and if we don't keep those two things the same, the political consequences of this whole thing blowing up is not going to work. So we need it to be grown in BC. So let's just get on with that, right? Let's get it out to Alberta where it needs to be sold. Let's get it out to Ontario where it needs to be sold. And let's do that within the framework that Health Canada has given us, as trying as that can be sometimes. There are avenues there, and it involves processors working with producers, standard and micro, to get this stuff batched up and off to the market. And I think if we're doing that, then prices, the market, some of these growers are going to retire in 5 years because they're going to realize they don't have the hunger for it anymore, but at least they got their payday before they did, and maybe they were even able to sell their genetics. So there's going to be some structural changes, but in 5 years, I hope that we're still treating this as a craft endeavor at some level, just the way they do in France, right? I mean, the French would never let the wine industry go to 2 box wine companies, right? There would be a political suicide mission. So I don't see Canada as being any different.
I'm not going to paint you a picture of what I think a successful landscape looks like, because I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say that I think it is more reflective in 5 years if we can look back and say that we were responsive and we were agile to the problems that we identified. So for me, it's about engineering within our corporate DNA, the ability to identify those problems and react quickly to solve them. The tone of some of this panel at some points and throughout the entire conference and just generally across the sector has been, obviously, as you can see, one of exasperation at points and criticism, and they're not unfounded. But I want to somewhat be the voice of patience, because I say this a bit, but this is our first time doing this. It's going to, by design, be our worst time doing this, our worst attempt, because it's our first attempt. So let's obviously recognize that there's just scrubs everywhere, all around us. We're all guilty of them. Patience with the regulator. I completely agree with Ian to push, but we have to recognize that this is literally the beginning of something really big. Imagine you were told to build a boat and you never knew what a boat looked like. I mean, we're talking about, trying to create something out of nothing. So I think success in 5 years is looking back and saying, we gave it a really good go initially, but we were responsive. And we were reasonable and sensible, and we laid down a really good foundation. We authored what will hopefully be the blueprint for a global industry. That's what 5 years looks like to me. If we copy, if every market is copying Canada in 5 years, I think that's a reasonable outcome, reasonable measurement of success.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo a little bit of what you just said, because there is a lot of negative insight, I guess, about this industry right now, but we kind of forget that this is unbelievable what our country has done, and the entire world is watching us, and I think we're doing a pretty damn good job considering nobody has attempted what we've done. This is a huge amount of people in this country, and it's exciting. Like 1017 was not the end of prohibition, it was the start of a legalized industry. It's day one. 5 years from now, I can't even imagine 5 days from now, because every single day I go to work, something else has changed. So in 5 years, I mean, we haven't even started to look at the potential of products. Everything is handcuffed right now because we're just starting this out. We need to go slow, baby steps. Like, this is going to be unbelievable. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about who knows what. has come out in terms of product innovation and branding strategies. So I can't even think about 5 years from now. I just want to really revel in the fact that this is an amazing achievement and it's only beginning, so it's really exciting.
Yeah, that's a good point. We forget sometimes it's actually a privilege to be complaining about how wrong they've gotten it. Right? For me, 5 years from now, it would be interesting to see if we had a reunion in this exact same panel and we actually talked about experiential marketing and what that looks like. So whether or not that is, in my mind, I think, and you touched upon this, where it seems like your stores, they're not stores where people are coming in to buy their weed and they're leaving. We're curating, we're turning these stores into these spaces where like-minded individuals like to gather. So it's a collective of people who either want to learn more or want to teach. And so it's more than just a place where you buy things and you leave. I see that where there are all these brand ambassadors, and if you're a retailer, it's so important to talk about the story and your brand voice right now, because ultimately, hopefully 5 years from now, you'll be able to wear a hat or a shirt or have a water bottle with a brand that you really enjoy and you're proud of. So hopefully a lot of the stores will have that permission to do that. And I want to see the same panel again in 5 years. I think it'd be so interesting.
Well, in Washington State, we're in our 5th year. We're not at 5 years yet, but going back 4+ years, we were sort of a mess, and we had to, we have to be responsible stewards of this industry, and the industry includes producers, processors, cultivators, folks who are for, folks who are against, legislators who have a clue, legislators who don't have a clue, the regulators who, I've been told that as much as 50% of our liquor and cannabis board in Washington State are actually anti-502, anti-legalization, which is kind of striking. But we've been responsible stewards of the industry, and we've grown that way. We haven't just kicked our feet and stamped and moaned and complained. We've actually got involved politically. We've tried to understand people's concerns and deal with them as best we can. Washington State, for all of its trials and tribulations, everything we've done in Washington State, we've done with the Cole Memo, which I know was just metaphorically torn up here a few months ago. Everything was done with the Cole Memo as a backdrop. Access to kids, cartels, stuff like that, basic stuff. We've accepted that responsibility. We need to accept that responsibility. And I think we have, and I think we're slowly changing people's minds in Washington State. I think we're slowly changing minds in the nation as a whole, in the states. But we've got a ways to go, and we've still got to be doing it better, neater, cleaner than other industries. We need to accept that. We need to embrace that, and even accept that as a challenge. Making somebody understand why they've got it wrong and why they misunderstand. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So we just need to be respectful of people's opinions, because it's something that people feel very strongly about when they feel against it. They can't necessarily articulate why, but they doggone it, I feel strongly against this. I just can't really explain why. So I learned a long time ago, man, we don't argue. We don't argue. We just go about our business. We try to do it the right way. We try to follow the rules. We understand. That doesn't mean you agree, but I understand. And frankly, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was in that group. I was. The only reason I've changed is because I've been immersed in this industry where we have people, like this. I noticed you looked that way when you said you'd like to reassemble with the panel, and I'm sitting right here. I'd like to come too. But we need to be stewards of the industry, and the industry includes everybody. Everybody. So take care of the baby. Take care of the industry.
Including our friends in Washington.
Right.
Other questions from Tony?
Just a quick one. Is this on? A fascinating conversation. I've been in the consumer market for 30 years, and I look at the liquor stores in Ontario, and 80% of the wine, 90% of the wine sold under $10. And then they come out with Fusion for $8, which I wouldn't wash my car in, but it becomes the best seller. So I think we got to give credit. There's a huge value segment out there. And then on The other thing I'm fascinated, I'd love to get your opinion on, is the elephant in the room. If Amazon was to come in with their Whole Foods brand as organic and just go out and simplify this, nowhere near where your level of sophistication is, but just sort of relaxation, sex, giggles, playing video games, something that, do you think that is the ultimate threat to where we are as an industry? I'm not saying it's going to take away the craft market.
No.
But it could be a sledgehammer that just completely changes everything.
Honestly, in the 5-10 years out, I see the market having stratified into, say, 10% of the flour producers or 10% of the flour that is produced actually hitting retail shelves. And all of the rest of it, even stuff that in today's market, as Rob said, stuff that 5 years ago or 3 years ago was good for them was no longer good. And the same thing will happen for us. And I think that the end game on not the flour market, for lack of a better term, is concentrates. I think that where you're going to get that consistent retail kind of consumer experience, and you can call it calm, you can call it elevated, you can call it whatever, that is going to come from concentrations, because you're never going to hit the same, you're not going to get the consistency out of flour that you need for that level of company at that size. It's just impossible to. Cannabis is too. It's like sending tomatoes across the country, right? It's just, you've got to really know what you're doing. And when you talk about produce, that's a whole market that's set up in a certain way, and we're not treating cannabis the same way. And I think that a far easier way, rather than trying again to choose special. And that, what's the Champagne Valley? It's just dirt, but it's special. I see the Fraser Valley being a valley that we talk about in cannabis in 20 years, the same way we talk about the Loire Valley.
So we should be thinking about branding regions as much as we are branding brands.
Absolutely, and almost thinking about it as branding your relationship with the craft growers, right? There's something to be said for being the processor that has a relationship with hundreds of craft growers that recognizes quality to the point where they can put, it's so much of things like food and alcohol and those other things are about that person you trust, the master distiller, to put their thumb here and say, this is where the whiskey's going to be, and this is where the stuff that I throw in the bathtub is going to be. That needs to come to cannabis, and that's where you build your brand. You build your brand, if you're a retail shop, by saying our retail shop has the best craft stuff on our craft shelf compared to the guys down the street. You build your chain, your supply chain by saying our processor has access to the best craft stuff. Because again, that's the only stuff that differentiates itself. Everything else becomes a commodity. And if you're fighting the commodity game, you're already losing.
I think we have another question there.